Everyone, welcome to the RTS podcast. I'm Mike Tashir. We've got Matt, Gary, and Adam back with us this week, and also we've got a new person here with us this week, Robb. And if you've been around IPF powerlifting, USAPL powerlifting lately, I'm sure that you've heard Mark's name come up. Mark actually won the IPF World Championship last year in South Africa. Mark competes in the 105 kilo class, so he's got some really impressive lifts. Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us what your PRs are, what you lift in South Africa, some stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. First of all, yeah, I compete in 105s, but it's a Masters 2, the M2 category. So, 50 to 59 age bracket. In South Africa, I did a 606-pound squat. Bench was sort of unimpressive, 336. Deadlifted 645, I think. Whatever that is in kilos, 292.5 or something like that. And then just barely missed a 680 deadlift. So that gave me a 720 kilo total.
Awesome. So if you guys have had the chance to sit around and talk to Mark for more than a few minutes, you'll know that he's an interesting guy. He's got a lot of interesting stories, done some cool stuff. So hopefully we'll get to see some of that stuff come out. He'll be around doing podcasts like this with us from time to time. So hopefully you guys will get to know Mark a bit better, and he'll share some of those stories with you. But today we plan to talk a little bit about injuries and recovery and just kind of some nebulous stuff like that. So just by way of getting things started, we're going to talk a little bit about injuries and some kind of personal stories about what injuries have we been through. No shortage of injuries on this call. I'm sure we've got plenty to go around. Hey Matt, do you want to get us started then?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and I'm happy to as well. Yeah, I guess fortunately, most of the injuries that I've sustained throughout my powerlifting career have been what I would categorize as non-catastrophic. They've been soft tissue injuries. I would say predominantly muscle tears and muscle strains. So they've been of that variety. Anybody that knows anything about muscles and tearing muscles or straining muscles, they're usually quantified, or I would say graded on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being the most mild and 3 being the most significant. Most of my muscle tears or strains have been in the second and first category, so a grade 2 or a grade 1 strain. And I've also had I've had the fortune of being connected to a really good chiropractor who's kind of part chiropractor and part physical therapist, if you will, and she's very well connected. And so a lot of these muscle tears that I've had confirmed via MRI, and because she's so well connected, I've actually had times where I've torn a quad and literally been in the MRI tube within about 3 to 4 hours post-injury. So I'm very thankful and blessed by being connected to her. But yeah, I mean, that's been kind of the nature of most of my injuries. I've never, fortunately, torn any ligaments. I've never had any back issues. I did tear my supraspinatus tendon in my right shoulder 2 years ago, and I actually did that squatting, of all things. But never torn any, never had any major knee or back injuries or anything like that. And I've had a couple surgeries, but they've largely been unrelated to powerlifting. So I would say that the bulk of my injuries, as I said, have been muscle tears or strains, and then of course, if we're all talking about kind of dings and stuff that everybody has to deal with, then you're talking about the inflammation and tendonitis, but I certainly wouldn't classify that as an injury. That's more of, something that we've all got to deal with. So.
Yeah. Yeah, my injury history is definitely not anything to complain about. Most of my stuff has been, pretty minor strains, and it tends to come in strings. I remember it's been quite a few years ago now, but I would have a string of pec injuries. I would have a strained pec, and then it would happen again, and then a few weeks later it would happen again, and then maybe a month or two later it would happen again. So things like that, and then you learn how to deal with it and take care of it, and then I haven't had any recurrence in quite a few years. Same thing with SI joint injuries. A while ago, I had quite a few of those that would recur on seemed like a yearly basis for a while until I finally learned how to take care of myself. More lately, it's just been kind of a hamstring tendinopathy. At least that's my assessment of it, and I'm still kind of learning how to deal with that one. But pretty benign injury history. Nothing really severe. Nothing that I've had to go get any imaging done or anything like that. Some stuff that I've definitely had to get checked out by a professional, but fortunately nothing that I would classify as severe. Adam, how's your injury history?
Oh man, so I'm pretty much like you in that regard. I actually all of my injuries came before I even started powerlifting. In a lot of ways, powerlifting has kind of let me rehab myself to make those go away. I came in to powerlifting with an L5S1 disc herniation, and I rehabbed that and just got stronger. And I mean, right now my latest thing that I'm dealing with is a SI joint injury, and it's kept me from squatting and deadlifting heavy for about 4.5 weeks now, 5 weeks. But I would attribute a lot of my lack of injuries to really good prehab stuff like chiropractic, massage therapy, and general fitness. Those things have kept me out of the doctor's office for sure.
Mark, you probably have the distinction, I guess, of being able to cope with injuries better than at least any of us here. Before I get too far ahead of myself, go ahead and tell us some of the stuff that you've had to deal with, and then we'll kind of get into some more interesting discussion.
Okay, well, I hate that you even asked, like what injuries have you had, because once I started listing them, I thought, holy crap, why am I even continuing to do this? I mean, I hate to even fess up about it,
Yeah.
Lifting related, I've had 2 herniated discs, 1 bulging disc, a complete distal bicep tendon rupture, torn wrist flexors in one arm, ligament injury along my spine at T9, T10, partially dislocated SC joint, which healed poorly and is still sticking out, a femoral acetabular impingement in my right hip, subacromial impingements in both shoulders, which ended up with partially torn supraspinatus in my right shoulder. And then, of course, muscle pulls, tendonitis, all that kind of stuff. I'm not even going to go there. So,
well, let's add a little context with that as well, Mark, because that's one thing that we harp on a lot, right? So you mentioned already that you're Masters 2. How long have you been lifting? What's your training age?
Well, I've been lifting except for, let's take 36 years. 36 years of lifting, less about 6 years for those ruptured discs, which basically took me out of the game for that long before they desiccated.
Yeah.
And I got the nerve irritation calmed down to the point where I could start doing something. So, yeah, that's kind of the context.
So depending on how we count, we're talking about a Masters 2 lifter with 30 to 36 years under the bar. I mean, of course. I mean, I would be shocked if you were in a situation like that and had, a very small injury list or anything like that. And given the level of experience that you've got, I don't know. I mean, that sounds about right to me.
Yeah.
But it definitely gives you an experience bed to work from, and like I said, that you've had to deal with, since you and I work together, I get a pretty up close and personal view of things, in terms of the injuries that you have and the lengths that you go to continue training and continue getting better, working around those injuries. What's kind of the I don't know, I don't want to say the motivating factor because I think that kind of takes us in the wrong direction.
Maybe the right word is
what's the mentality that you have when you're working around stuff like that?
You say the mentality?
Yeah. So,
well,
I mean, is it just kind of do whatever you can to, do whatever you can that doesn't hurt, or what do you? If you're, let's say we're talking about the shoulder injuries that continue to bother you. If you're working around a shoulder injury like that, what kinds of things are you thinking?
Well, I guess the first and foremost in my mind, and you and I have talked about this a little bit before, I strongly believe that your health is your own responsibility. I mean, you can't lay it off on a doctor or anybody else, you're responsible for your own health. So ultimately, if I've got something going on and I don't know what the problem is, it's just pain. First of all, I try to figure out what's causing the pain. And if I can't figure it out for myself, then, try to enlist the help of professionals, whoever it might make the most sense to see, whether it's it looks like it's a joint injury or a ligament, tendon, muscle, whatever. And once I identify what most likely is the problem, then what follows is how to deal with it or how to treat it.
Yeah, you've got a better angle on it once you have a clear view of what the problem is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then usually, that's about the time you hear from me and we say, hey, we get our heads together and, hey, how are we going to deal with this? We're going to have to change some exercises to train around this injury or back off on the training or, take 3 weeks off, or what do we got to do here?
Yeah.
Mark, in your training history, have you noticed that there is maybe a general pattern of behavior leading up to injuries, maybe just at all?
Yes, definitely. The two, and this might be kind of controversial a little bit, but it's my take on it. First thing is, basically, like we talked a long time ago, Mike and I talked a long time ago about the sort of the ideal training mindset being a controlled aggressive.
Right.
And so that was the hardest lesson I had to learn, was to incorporate the controlled part in there. Because if I was just being all out aggressive, you're going to get hurt. You don't have enough sense or wisdom, whatever, to back off when something starts hurting. You think, oh, well, I can push through this, I can get it done. Well, yeah, you can push through it and get it done, but you're going to end up hurt, which is going to set you back further. So that's one thing. And then the other sort of physical red flag for me is inflammation. If I've got inflammation going on consistently somewhere, then I'm wary about really pushing things in that area until that gets resolved. Because, you know, if you got, say, tendonitis, that's an inflammation of the tendon, but it's not just an inflammation of the tendon. It's an inflammation. That inflammation is in that area, whatever, you know, if it's in your knee, your elbow, whatever, it's in that whole area. And so basically everything in that area, in my mind, is you know, you better be careful, because that's when things go into acute injury.
Yeah. Just a quick story to back you up on that. I was talking a bit about me having a string of SI joint injuries at one period of time. I had a couple at this point, over the course of a long period of time. Something would get injured and then it would heal. You would train for a while, get stronger and everything, and then, a period of time later it would get re-injured. So that happens, I don't know, maybe 2-3 times. And then I was training one day, doing deadlifts, had an SI joint sprain. I knew what it felt like. So I knew I had injured it at that point. And I get the bright idea, like, well, let's just continue on with the workout. If I keep moving, then I'll be fine. It sounded good at the time, but then that was by far the worst one. It took the longest to heal. I was in the worst shape the next day, and so on. And just I kind of bring that up to say, we don't always make the best decisions kind of in the heat of the moment. It's good to have a sounding board that can kind of tell you, hey, Mike, that's a bad idea. Why don't you just pack it up for today, live to fight another day kind of thing. So that would have been good. Lesson learned there. Don't just keep going, especially if you know that you've already done something bad. Kind of more toward your second point, though, one of inflammation. Matt, I know that you coach a lot of lifters, and I'm sure that from time to time we all end up with different joint irritations and stuff like that. Do you do anything programming-wise to take that stuff into account?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a constant feedback loop that I try to maintain with my lifters in terms of, obviously how they're feeling. And when they start to report, issues and inflammation and so forth, and we, I think the first thing that we do is talk about, the volume and how much volume they're doing and so forth, and possibly reduce the volume first. And then I would say, there would be a second reduction in either the intensity and then the frequency being the last piece to mitigate that ahead of the curve. I think, I think people sometimes make drastic changes in their programming, and so just a very simple, basic example is if you're squatting once a week and then all of a sudden they start squatting 3 and 4 times a week. I mean, that's ridiculous. You're going to get hurt. Something's going to happen. You're going to experience some kind of setback. So I think we try to make small changes first, followed by, and a lot of small changes add up to big ones. So to kind of get ahead of the curve, we do gradual increases in volume over time, and we might, if I know that I want to raise a lifter's volume significantly, over the course of a couple of training blocks, we ease into it and do it gradually and kind of ramp up, to our peak volume. We don't just do it all at once, and we may not raise the volume of every single lift all at once. So, I mean, those are some of the things that I kind of look at. And then, as I said, once they report back to me and they're experiencing, inflammation or something like that, then, we talk about, I think sometimes something could be wrong from a technical standpoint as well. So I think you have to, if you can get your eyes on a lifter and get your hands on them and making sure that their technique is on point and dialed in. Lots of times, they might be experiencing knee pain because their knees aren't tracking properly in the squat, or they've got, shoulder issues because of the way that they're carrying the bar, or, things of that nature. And if you can address the technical issues, sometimes that'll fix it, obviously,
Yeah.
If not, then we start addressing some of the programming issues.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And you see that a lot. It seems like a lot of people who are transitioning into a low bar squat position, they'll have some shoulder, elbow irritation come up from that. A lot of that stuff sometimes can be addressed with technical changes. I'm kind of a similar approach as well, in terms of adjustments that I'll make. We definitely don't want people pushing through injuries. I think that much is obvious, but I even try to limit how much I'll let an athlete push through inflammation, like joint irritation, stuff like that as well. I know some coaches consider that to just be part of the deal. I don't think so. And I think that if you get your joints good and beat up and continue to push things hard, you're asking for something more serious coming down the road.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of this a bit of a spectrum, when it comes to things like recovery. It's not even really injuries, but just kind of this smaller irritation kind of stuff.
Right.
And I think, Mark, maybe this kind of goes a little bit into what you were saying earlier. Do you want to kind of toss out those questions now?
Yeah, that's fine. The questions kind of basically originated a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, when you remember when I was having problems with, and here's where we kind of didn't quite, I don't think we were quite on the same page, with basically you were defining it as non-recovery. I was defining it as needing more time to heal up. Now, basically, in retrospect, they're probably the same thing. But, that's kind of where my questions came from in the first place. Is
kind of what's the line then? Like, what's the difference between something being an injury and something being a recovery issue?
Yeah, suppose your training is going well, you got forward momentum, you feel like you're recovering well, your track score's good, but you've got tendonitis somewhere say you got quad tendonitis in one knee, the other knee's fine. Is that non-recovery, or is that how do you deal with that? And, that's kind of where it was your idea to start me on these 3-week blocks, which were fantastic. I mean, they worked great because they allowed me basically, 50% or 60% more time to recover every 3 weeks, or to heal, I should say, heal every 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I see where you're going with it. Just a little background on these 3-week blocks. What we were doing with Mark, as he mentioned, we were kind of in this stage where he was getting pretty dinged up a lot, minor injuries, irritation, stuff like that. I figured that it was, any way we slice it, it's just not having enough time to deal with the training stress, whether it was enough time to heal, from a physical standpoint, or enough time to recover from the workload, whatever. We basically needed a little bit more time. So what we decided to do was to shift to these 3-week block patterns. So the first week was higher intensity, the idea being that the first training week is when you're the most fresh, so we would push heavier weights during that opening week. Then in the second week, you'd be a little bit more beat up, so at that point you would back off the intensity a little bit and push more volume. And then the third week, you're probably dealing with a little bit of irritation, stuff like that, so we would have a planned deload at that time. Now, that's not an idea that I came up with. I learned it at a seminar about Chinese weightlifting from Jed Smith. He's the one that told me about the idea, and I applied it to Mark, and it worked brilliantly. Yeah, so I think in that case, that was just kind of an issue of, just allowing a little bit more time for recovery. Now, whether it was actual tissue healing that needed to happen or just a little bit more time to kind of let the inflammation dissipate or what, I'm not entirely sure. I don't know. And tissues are going to recover at a different pace as well, so if you have any sort of technical anomaly that could lead to, maybe your right knee, accumulating more trauma and then having more inflammation than your left knee. And maybe that's why you need a little bit more recovery time. It's okay if that stuff's unbalanced. I think the bottom line is just the requirement for time at certain points.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, what's your assessment here? Do you kind of see things on this this recovery, non-recovery spectrum, or do you see injuries as being something completely different?
No, I do agree with what you're all saying, and I think that inflammation, as Mark alluded to, can be a precursor and indicator of something's off and something's coming down the pike, so to speak. I think that it's important that everybody differentiate between pain and discomfort and, ouch, I just hurt something, and because obviously there is a difference. And that's not to say, going back to what you said, Mike, about, some coaches say, well, inflammation, tendonitis is just something we all have to deal with. I kind of get that, but again, you said, context is everything. So, yeah, we're going to have to deal with some of that, but it's something that shouldn't be shelved. It needs to be addressed. But I think the differentiation between, dealing with some pain and some discomfort, and recognizing that this is an injury and it's been chronic enough that it's probably going to lead to something more is really an important piece, so that you can hopefully get ahead of stuff. Because when you can't get ahead of stuff, then you're not going to be able to train. And so, and that's what we're all trying to do, right? We're all trying to, increase the amount of time that we can devote to our craft. So, when you're injured, that time is going to be decreased, significantly.
Yeah, consistent heavy training being, that requirement that we have to meet to have continual improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think there's, if I can just mention, it's important that these transition periods after peaks or after competitions where you're having these active rest blocks, and sometimes that period may only last a week or two. Other times it needs to last longer. After Raw Nationals last year, I was absolutely fried. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, just on every level. And my active rest transition block turned out to be probably between 4 and closer to 6 weeks. And, you're not going to, as long as you keep doing something, but you program in, lower volume, lower intensity and so forth, but you're able to keep the train going down the tracks. And,
substantial rest times, yeah.
Absolutely, and it was stronger. It came back better and fresher in both mind and body, and a lot of people don't realize that. They think that if you're not training hard and you're not training heavy all the time, that you're just magically going to get weaker, and that's not how it works. At least not in my experience.
No, not at all. And Go ahead.
Speaking of, training heavy all the time, have you guys noticed that there's, any sort of correlation between training heavy at high intensity versus just, lower intensity and higher volume? Do you find that there are, the same types of injuries or different types of injuries resulting from either of those cases?
I've personally noticed more injury type issues when lifters get beat up. So I see more problems coming from high volume training. And I mean, I haven't exactly run any numbers on that or anything, so it's anecdote as far as you can get it. But my gut feeling is that when we start pushing the volume, you start seeing more issues of people getting beat up. And,
sorry, CT Fletcher.
Well, you see more stuff, more inflammation type stuff come up. You see more just general issues of soreness and immobility. All that stuff starts to become a problem. Now, if you're lifting under fatigue, like you often are with high volume training, there's technical breakdowns, and that of course can lead to other problems as well. Now the answer to that isn't to shy away from high volume training. It's it becomes a fine line that you have to walk. You've got to push the volume enough so that you can continue to improve, and that's a different threshold for each individual. Depending on your work capacity and your training history and all this stuff. But at the same time, if you push things too hard and you're getting injured, then if you're injured, you're not stronger. So we've got to find this balance,
Yeah,
and with regard to like general inflammation type stuff, I think a good rule of thumb is you have to be getting better. I remember I can't remember when it was exactly, but there was a time when I was squatting and I was getting a lot of calf pain. I probably had a strained calf at some point, and I didn't really know when it was. I had a competition coming up, so I kept it did, and I would think to myself, like, if I had a lifter who told me that they were in a situation, what advice would I give them? In any other situation, it might have been, take a week, rest up. I didn't do that. But I did watch it closely, and what I noticed is, hey, it's getting better. It's not getting better quickly, but it's getting better. So it was to the point where it wasn't really disruptive to my technique or anything. I could deal with it, so I dealt with it, and it did get better. Eventually I wasn't. So then again, maybe not. I don't think there's any harm in saying, you know what, I'm going to take a week and let this heal for good and then not deal with it anymore,
Mark, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah, I just had kind of going back to what Matt said a little bit ago and what Mike's also been saying. I think the question, or the best question to ask, like if I'm in doubt about whether to train or not, or how much to do, when to call it and throw in the towel on a session or whatever, I've learned to ask myself, well, what can I do to make the most progress? That's the big question, because that's what we're after, is progress, momentum. Sometimes in extreme circumstances, the answer to that question is nothing. Don't train.
Yeah.
You might, if you train and get hurt and get set back several weeks, that's far worse than if you just don't train at all. If you can make an intelligent, informed decision about that, or, hey, Mike's got all this stuff programmed for me, but this is, I think I'm going to make better progress if I back off of this a little bit because, I'm getting too beat up.
Yeah, this notion of I've done all I can do, and any more is gonna ruin it. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that harmony spot that has to happen. And any one more brushstroke ruins the painting kind of a mentality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
is it? Do you think it's all inevitable? We think that to reach the pinnacle of the sport, you're going to have injuries, or is it possible to be injury-free the whole way?
I mean, I think it's important to be as injury-free as possible, and I think that's part of having a long-term plan. Stuff's going to happen. You have to train hard. You have to push it. I don't think you have to push it as a novice necessarily. I think you're going to have to push your training at some point. So when that point comes, push it, of course. And when you are kind of on that borderline, sometimes things are going to happen. That's part of the deal. But, we're talking about staying as injury-free as you can. If you're only getting better when you're able to consistently train, put some serious effort into your training, what's going to yield more results over the long term? Taking a week of maybe easier squatting this week, or having to take 4 weeks of no squatting at all because you pushed it and now you've got some sort of injury. And then it could be something more serious that you'll be dealing with on a long-term basis for a while. There's some luck that's involved, but I think staying healthy is an important part of this process. Middle grounds to everything, of course. I've also seen people who get so caught up in whatever the thing might be, like absolutely pristine, perfect technique. Their technique is wonderful, but it's like somewhere along the way they forgot that they need to lift heavy. So they have very good technique, but they never lift anything heavy. Part of it's to stay healthy, and part of it's this ideal of technical perfection. I mean, we're all going to be in agreement. All of us here are going to be in agreement that you have to have good technique, of course. But you have to lift heavy weights in order to lift heavy weights, and it takes a while to develop those things. I'm kind of rambling off the beaten track here, Matt. What do you think? You think injuries are part of the deal? That's something that's going to happen?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about managing the injuries and keeping it from sidelining you for too long. I mean, if you've been in the sport long enough, as Mark has, as Susie has, and many others, and you're pushing hard and you're trying to extract, high performance, something's going to happen. And I don't mean that to sound pessimistic. It's just, it's kind of reality, and it's something that we, I think we accept when we enter into this, just like I think football players accept that. I mean, sooner or later, they're, something's probably going to happen, and you're just trying to manage it from becoming, career-ending, career-threatening, career, jeopardizing, et cetera. You're just trying to manage those things over time, and as you said, by having a long-term annual plan and attention to detail and monitoring these things before they are exacerbated, I mean, that's going to play a huge role in your long-term health and success.
Yeah. Just kind of by way of, wrapping things up, I guess, a little bit. Talking about injuries can sometimes be a little bit depressing, and certainly we don't want it to be that. But it's a reality of coaching, and if you're listening to this, then you're probably coaching in some capacity, either other lifters or coaching yourself or something. And like Matt said, it's about managing that process. So the mentality that you come at coaching is different than the mentality that you have when you're an athlete. And if you're self-coached, then you'll hear me talk about sometimes you have to wear these different hats. When you're an athlete, you have to be the athlete. You have to focus and be the athlete with all of your being. But then when it's time to analyze things, you have to be the coach, and you have to look at things with a little maturity and with a little bit of perspective. So just some things to keep in mind as you hopefully digest some of this stuff and extract some value from this kind of conversation. But before we wrap things up, just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's new at SSPT? And for those that don't know, tell us a little bit about SSPT as well.
Okay. Yeah, for those that don't know, SSPT in its most basic form is a 2,000 square foot training facility known as Supreme Sports Performance and Training, and it's located in Rockville, Maryland. And, we're just a small warehouse facility that's catered primarily toward powerlifters, weightlifters. We've got a few strongman competitors, sporting athletes. We've got high school and collegiate athletes who train with us. So it's geared towards that breed and people who are serious about their training and serious about their fitness. In kind of in a broader sense, it's Susan and I and our coaching outreach through clinics and seminars, and my involvement obviously with USAPL in a sense, and some of the work that I do there. So we're just not just a physical facility, but I think SSPT stands for much more, and kind of what we espouse, and not to get too corny, if you will, but just it has to do a lot with our morals and values, and the things that we espouse that are important to us. But yeah, we have, depending upon the time of year, we probably have anywhere between 75 and 100 actual members who come through our doors on a weekly basis and train. And then in a broader sense, in terms of the community and the company that we keep, I've got a lot of lifters and athletes that I consult with online and, of course, over the phone, and that we're involved with at competitions and at clinics and seminars. And so I think that kind of gives a broader view of what we are and kind of what we do. In terms of some of the newer stuff that we're working on, actually, Susie and I are in the process of brainstorming on putting together a mentorship program. And, we mentor a lot of lifters, obviously, and coaches in a literal sense, but in a more formal sense, we're trying to piece together what we believe could be something kind of longer term with up and coming coaches. So just using our experience both domestically and internationally as coaches, Susie and I, and having people actually travel with us and participate and kind of shadow us in the gym and in competitions. So I have one aspiring lifter and coach, as a matter of fact, I won't name names, but someone who's coming from the Midwest and is going to spend some time with us this May, and they're actually going to stay in the area for a few days and come into the gym and train alongside of us, and then they're also going to come with us to a competition and shadow us as we coach some other lifters. So I think there's a lot of things that get lost in translation in in kind of the game day coaching aspect, and that's something that we hold very dear to our hearts, and is actually one of the things that I think we do the best. In other words, I think there's other people out there who program a lot better than we do, and so forth. And I think that when it comes to the hands-on technical expertise and the game day coaching, that's what we're the best at. So let's put it that way. So, and hopefully that'll develop into some type of certificate that we can put out. So again, I'm kind of painting with broad strokes, but that's something that we're kind of pretty excited about.
Right.
That might be coming to fruition
sooner,
hopefully, rather than later.
Yeah, and I'm going to echo those sentiments here real quick. That when it comes to game day performance. There's nobody that I would rather have in my corner. I mean, I've said that a million times now, but Matt is the guy. Matt and Susie, the work they put in to manage lifters. I mean, if there's a way that that you can learn from them, if you know, kind of managing lifters hands-on at a competition, if you see that in your future, I mean, and who among us doesn't, you know, like even if you're just coaching yourself, it's better if you know what the heck is going on, what you're supposed to be doing, you know. So wow, I actually didn't know that until just now that you guys were putting that together. That's going to be awesome. So
we're excited
keep
about
us posted on that. Keep me posted on that. That's really interesting stuff. So and gosh, Matt, you touched on a bunch of stuff in terms of values and informing on how you're going to run a facility and stuff like that. We could continue talking about that stuff for a long time, but I think that's about all the time that we've got for today. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks Matt, Mark, and Adam for hanging out, talking about injuries today. Yeah, thanks everybody for watching. We'll make sure to see you next time.